Ladies and gentlemen, this is the sixth episode of the Concerned Dabs podcast. I am your host, Katie M. Kane. With me is my co host, Will Terps.
Yo, yo.
So, tonight's episode is about lab testing. So, we have two guests. One is Paul Swift from Chem History and Swift Solutions Consulting. And we also have Anthony Smith from EVIO Labs. Which I came to find out bought out MRX last year. Used to rock with MRX a lot when I was a medical grower in Oregon, so it's cool to hear they made some money. But talking to that Paul guy too, it sounds like they have more labs in more than one country. So
Nice.
yeah, or
Nice.
Anthony Smith. What How do you feel about lab testing in Oregon, Will? I mean, you're a salesperson and everything, so
Yeah.
you,
I mean,
you,
I feel like it's pretty advanced for the most part, in terms of just like what's required to get products on the shelves.
mm-hmm.
Um, you know, the fact that Oregon requires you to test for, hundreds of different pesticides, um, as well as potency, obviously. And one thing that could be improved, I'm pretty sure that they don't test. There's not too high of limits for like mold counts. I think they have like high limits for colony forming units with like mold counts,
Ah,
because a lot of the outdoor. But
yeah,
in general, just the mainly with the extensive pesticide testing. That's like I've said before, that's more than our food gets tested for. That's more pesticides our food than our food gets tested for. So
I
um,
agree.
it's
That's
crazy.
any when I'd be behind the counter, that's what I would tell folks too, is like this is still safer than whatever you buy at the grocery store.
Exactly.
It
Exactly.
went through more tests to get on this shelf than that food did to get on the shelf at Safeway or Fred Meyer's or whatever.
Definitely. Definitely.
Yeah. Um and then do you think that well, I mean, I've heard you guys say this before, but as far as customer point of view, you think a lot of emphasis is placed on the THC or CBD number on the lab test.
Definitely. Yeah. You know, bud tenders and myself do our best to educate people. The THC isn't everything. Um,
Yes.
but there's a lot of people that come in and just still don't, they won't take any advice. They know what they want their highest THC, and
Want
they
that
don't want to
30%? You don't have
you know
anything 30?
exactly, they don't want to stray from that. A question I like to ask people though is, if people directly ask me like what's the highest THC you have right now, is I'll respond, I'll say, do you want the highest THC or what's going to get you the highest? Because oftentimes, the strongest, or most potent strain we have is, not the highest testing.
Correct, sir. Correct. Yeah, it's about those terps too, man. It's a synergistic effect. Yeah,
Absolutely,
yeah.
absolutely.
Everything in combination together is gonna.
Yep, that
That's
entourage effect with the terpenes. Yep.
yeah. That's like, dude. When I smoke distillate carts, I just yeah, I feel kind of high, but it just doesn't
Yeah.
feel the same, man. Like there's a
hmm
whole bunch of stuff missing, you know?
Yeah, it's very monotone for sure.
Yeah. Like, yeah, I don't really groove on that too much.
Um,
We should have our first guest calling in on the 800 number here within a couple of minutes. Um, One thing I wanted to share about lab testing too is I live down here in Phoenix, Arizona right now, and there, I think potency is required, and that's it. And there's no residual pesticide test whatsoever to get on the shelf. And
Yikes.
it's still a medical state, you know, it's medical cannabis at a medical dispensary
Yeah.
that didn't go through a residual pesticide test. So it just gives me cause for concern, like I don't know, man. Like especially the oil too,
Yeah.
like
Oh, yeah. No, I mean, yeah. If you're gonna call it, if it's gonna be a medical program, truly make it about the medicinal aspect of it. Have some sort of standard for, like products that get to shelves and that patients will, eventually be ingesting or smoking.
no doubt. So we should have Anthony, or excuse me, Paul Smith. Has he called in yet over there, Mitchell? On the Grasshopper app? Looks like Mitchell's doing something over there. Okay, he says he's calling right now. So, um, I don't know much about any other states other than when Washington first went rec, they didn't check for that many pesticides,
Hmm.
and then they got more stringent a year or two later. So, I mean, I guess that's a good thing, but I don't know much about Cali's regulations or anywhere else in the Midwest or East Coast that's just now starting to turn over.
Totally.
Is there out there where you're at, Will, is there residual pesticide test on what's on the shelf, or is it just potency too?
There is, I believe. I'm not too keen on the testing laws out here, but I believe there is pesticide testing. I don't think it's anywhere close to as stringent as Oregon's, obviously. And yeah, I don't think it's super, I don't think there's a long list of pesticides that they test for. Let's put it that way.
Okay. All right. And then like selection, you said is still pretty slim.
Yeah, it's getting better. I was checking the menu of a local spot the other day, and they actually had 20 strains available. So that's a pretty good amount. That's definitely a step up from what I'd seen before. Um, but yeah, still the spot that I like to go to most still just has like 6 or 7 strains at a time. But it's some pretty good ones. I just got some train wreck the other day, which is actually pretty bomb.
Nice, dude.
Yeah.
Nice. Super cool. All right, so we had a technical difficulty patching him into the call. We're gonna attempt this one more time, ladies and gentlemen. Um, so what else? What kind of questions are you gonna ask tonight, Will?
Um, you know, I have a few questions in mind. Just about, I don't know, um, volume of product and batch testing in particular. With Oregon can get tricky.
Yeah,
Because I don't think they have ways to make it um, you know make sense for like the growers and the edible makers and the concentrate makers that get their all their stuff tested by them because I think they have to pay you know multiple batch test like for multiple batch tests rather than being able to pay just like one set price for instead of having to break it up. um,
yeah.
but yeah, kind of want to know more about that.
Okay, so still technical difficulties. We're gonna try and call him. Apologize for the inconvenience, ladies and gentlemen. We really want to ask these guys some questions because I don't really know much about it, Will. I've never worked in one of those places. I've just sent
No.
in samples as a grower and a dispensary manager. So I
Yep.
okay. Hello, can you hear us, Paul? All right, cool. Sorry about the technical difficulties, dude. Yeah, man, we appreciate you coming on. We know it's a 3-day weekend and it's something like work on a Sunday night, so we appreciate you showing up to answer our questions, man. Cool, cool. So, can you state your name, the state you're in, and the company you work for?
Chem History Laboratories located, and that's the company that I work for.
Nice, nice. Chem history. I always thought their name was dope just because it's like chemistry, you know what I mean? And then it's like, nah, let's
Exactly.
separate it, and it's like a history of what
Yeah,
happened to the plant. And
Alex, the owner for that, came up with that, and they've been around for about almost 5 years now.
that's dope, man. That's dope. And so you also have a consulting company, correct?
Yes, absolutely. Swiss Solutions. Um, Currently, it's kind of trying to be an answer to some of the needs for the industry, which I felt like weren't being met for some of our customers, which is an easy source for science consulting, kind of answering any kind of questions related to um, processing or production that normally companies are having trouble outsourcing work to, but trying to fill that niche a little bit with Swift Solutions. I appreciate.
No doubt. No doubt, man. Well, you got game, man. You might as well charge for it, bro. You know what I mean?
Well, trying to. I when I worked in the industry on the processing side, more of things. One of the biggest problems was not having testing equipment around, easily accessible to a facility to do a research and development and kind of, um, you know, increase the production of their process or whatever. And they always have to send out tests to a laboratory company and wait a couple weeks for results. And it's
Yeah,
really hard to adjust a process that way. But um, yeah, working with a lab directly can be a good solution for that problem.
I agree. So do you guys do like monthly fee or something? Like you can send in 10 samples or something like that for this monthly fee and everything is within a week or something like that.
We'll always work with people. One of the major testing distinctions that we make is for full compliance testing, which is required by the state in order to sell a sample in the rec market or the medical market, depending on what your game is. Um, but we also do advisory testing, which is not regulated by the state and can be done for much cheaper. Generally, people are bunching a bunch of R&D samples together. They'll get a much better discount.
That's cool. So it's just like potency without everything else or something.
Exactly. Or for some reason, somebody's process is investigating, pesticides through their process. We can do that as well. But generally, it's potency for people's, trying to refine a recipe or something like that. We're noticing that a lot of people are requiring tightening up of the tolerances of making products. So you can't have such overages or underages and still get it to market. So that's kind of a thing people are learning, that they have to dial it in a lot better and have a lot more stringent standard operating procedure for their process.
Word. So does the chemical composition change over time? Is that why the lab test is only good for 6 months?
That could very well be, especially in the hemp, where
And
the
and is it six
distinction is
months? Is
made
that
between.
correct?
Um, I'd have to check exactly. I think 6 months, but I know for some things we
I,
offer a year.
I think it's a
It
year.
just
Yeah.
depends what you're kind of
Okay.
looking at.
Okay.
What's that?
I said okay.
Yeah, about a year, I think, for control studies, which allows people to um, test the same. If they have an in-house process, they can test the same product, and they kind of get the benefit of the doubt from the state. If they do a one-time testing that has a large population of samples, then the state has keeps a record of it for 1 year, and then they say, okay, we'll vouch for this product for 1 year from today, and that generally helps also reduce testing burden on companies.
That's cool, man. So,
Yeah, cost is a big thing for companies too.
So you were an extractor. Is that I was my cookie cutter question is how did you find yourself in this part of the industry? Like you were an
No,
extractor
absolutely.
first, and then what is
Yeah,
your education like? You're a chemist?
yeah, my schooling background's in chemical engineering, and I was actually in pursuit of the more traditional professional track at the time when I had an internship in Colorado when the medical cannabis was kind of just getting off the ground, and I took an
Tight.
interest in making concentrates, which weren't really around very much back then, and that kind of is what attracted me to the industry, to be able to use all the higher schooling for promoting cannabis industry, because I come from Arizona, which didn't have as friendly of an industry, and
Yeah,
that was
it's
part of the
still
reason I
not
came
that
out to
friendly.
Oregon, was to get a difference.
Yeah, dude, Oregon is a much different place. I feel like the difference too is being allowed to cultivate. Like everybody in Oregon can grow 4 plants
Yeah,
now, so everybody is, it's like why not, man? Get some pots of dirt and
yeah,
see what it do. But you can't do that down
absolutely.
here in Arizona, not even with a medical card. You have to live 25 miles from a dispensary to even attempt
That's
cultivation
right.
or own a dispensary and have a production facility next to your retail. So it just really
Yeah,
large
and it,
barriers to entry for anybody who wants to grow their own, and that's what I feel like that's the difference in what's on the shelf too. You know what I mean? If more patients were able to grow their own, they would know what they're looking at and demand better.
yeah, they could
Definitely.
participate with it a little bit more. I mean, in Oregon, you can as the dispensaries, they'll sell baby vegetative cannabis plants, to make
Yeah,
the whole
dude.
growing process easier for people. They really do try to
Yeah,
promote access.
yeah. Clones are
Um,
for real. That's big business, man. Shout out to
yeah,
West
no,
Coast
it is.
Chronics.
Yeah, no, but
That guy's
access is
got
very
game.
important. And when you don't give people access to the necessary medicine, they end up having to pay a lot more for things that aren't helping them, and look for alternative
Yeah.
solutions. And
Okay. So I'm gonna skip around here to another question.
okay.
How many pesticides do Oregon labs screen for?
I and I was reading over the questions I think you sent me before, and I think it's 60 right now. Um,
Okay.
I know that the state allows you to test for more pesticides, and like our lab, for example, brought an additional 15 pesticides that we have the capability to test for. But right now it's about 60 pesticides.
And then so you guys are also ORALAP accredited. What was the transition like going from medical lab testing to recreational lab testing? Like I know
I've
a
only
lot of labs
heard
had a
the horror
difficult
stories.
time.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I
it
was gonna
sounded like
say
a,
I've
a
only
tough
heard
one, man.
the trying times with the test, the switch from medical to rec, and basically getting ORLAP accredited is a long process. They need to certify your in-house process for testing against um, basically industry standards, kind of. And it can be an arduous process if you're trying to validate something to ORLAP. Eventually, I think it took up over a year to get accreditation for potency, and some terpenes and solvents is easier, but pesticide certification, because of the complexity of the test, it's a much more rigorous process to get certified for. And like I said, that was the make or break point for a lot of laboratories at that point of transition in the industry. There used to be a lot more labs in the game that would just offer
Yeah.
a smaller set of tests.
Yeah, I
And
remember everyone was going to Pixis for a while because that was one of the only labs that was accredited for for pesticides off the bat,
Absolutely.
so people were outsourcing that, their tests for a
I
bit.
believe we did that too. Yeah, I think
Nice.
Alex said that we used to outsource our pesticides to Pixis as well because they, like you're saying, they were the only ones certified at the time.
Yeah, exactly.
Dang, that's crazy. So they were like they already had the certification, so they're like, oh,
Yeah,
we could do weed. Give us a license.
yeah, because I think they're originally a food lab. I could be wrong, but there's some
No, I
other
believe
lab
you're right.
like or yeah, food lab or a water testing lab, something like that. So I think they had the equipment already. Yeah.
That's
Yeah,
very cool,
yeah,
man. So, what
yeah.
other tests besides potency are required for compliance in Oregon for medical or recreational marijuana?
Uh,
So, is it like
for
Is it like
marijuana, it's
E. coli or something like that?
actually the microbials aren't even required by the state right now. We offer them for people who want them, but I don't believe they're a requirement. What they do is they measure the water activity, which is related to moisture content but slightly different, and they use that as a test to determine whether or not they believe that it's at risk for mold or those biologicals.
So, what is that? Just like the moisture test, the moisture content in the sample, like they just judge it off of that or something?
There's a slightly different instrument that they have to measure uh, excuse me, water content. Not water content.
Moisture
It's not the
content,
moisture
some.
content. It's slightly different. Sorry, I'm blanking right now. Water activity. I apologize. So water activity. There's a special instrument that you can buy to measure water activity. And without going into too much detail, let's just say it suffices. It's similar to water content, but it's what they use in the food industry and stuff too, kind of as a measure. There's a cutoff. I think it's 0.6 that they use to kind of predict whether or not microbial growth is possible.
Word. Yeah, because I mean, I haven't, well, I guess sometimes that would happen in the store, but it'd have to be sitting there for a while. But I remember being in high school and one of the homies scored like a quarter pound of weed and it was some brown weed, but it had all this white shit growing on it. And I was like, dude, what
Oh
is
man.
that? And it was mold. And he'd say, man, it's just penicillin. It'll be all right. It's medicine. Like, whatever. I was in high school and he's my bro. Spend $10, man, whatever. But it's
Yeah.
that was probably sitting for a while and was probably pretty moist and grew a bunch of mold on it. So I'm sure that stuff would have failed. But there was
Yeah.
certain instances where people, because I did intake at this place called Human Collective for a few months, and some people would bring in weed that I'm like, dude, this is mold. Like now I'm like, look, that brown gray piece right there, that's what that is. And they're like, no way. It was weird,
Yes,
dude.
there's
Like,
it really should do a full mold test if you want to kind of determine, like I said, the water activities. It's like a guesstimation kind of, and I sometimes you do see samples that do have indications of mold and stuff on them. That is kind of troublesome, especially for patients that are immunosuppressed or at risk for those types of things.
yeah. Well, do you guys still receive many medical samples as opposed to rec samples to
To
test at
be
your lab?
to be honest, sir, the medical market is kind of getting squeezed out. Is the best way
Yeah.
to say it. The regulations for the rec market are so strong that they kind of overlook the needs of the medical market right now. And you can still test as a medical grower and stuff like that, but the cost of testing, the burdens are so high that there's so little margins now, not like they were that great anyways to begin with, but that we just don't see that many medical growers anymore.
Bummer, man. Yeah, I that's what happened to me, dude. Once they said you got to get the metric license if you have more than 12 plants, I was like, damn,
Yeah,
man.
that's exactly what happened. They have to be metric
But
compliant now, which cost
Yeah, but
preclusive.
and I don't know if this changed, but they also stipulated at that time that you could only sell 20 pounds to the store in a year from your harvest. So I'm like, what?
Um,
It's like, man, like I could go pretty big outside. Like that's whack. Like, what if I pull 50? I can only put 20 into the stores. Like, what am I gonna do with the other 30? You know, like
That's a
it
good
just
question. I don't know if they cap that right now. I know the number of plants to the canopy size is kind of how they do it. I would be surprised if they did that, but that might very well be. I'm not sure.
yeah, man. And a lot of my friends and family too went the same route. They're like, dude, it's not even worth it anymore. I'm not even
Yeah,
gonna
it's
do
so
12 plants.
sad.
I'm only gonna do my four. I'm just gonna grow my four in my backyard and that's gonna be that. And I'm like, damn, man.
Yeah,
Bummer,
and the people that
guys.
suffer the worst are the patients that need those, medical growers to, keep
Yeah,
their medical
exactly.
supply full and stuff.
Yeah.
Because paying that rec price for your medicine, even with the tax discount, is still not feasible for a lot of patients. A lot of patients really counted on that harvest every year to supply them their meds for
Yeah.
the rest of the coming year. You know what I mean? And I would even give patients oil too. Like, you know, if you're severe,
Uh-huh.
here you go. Here's half a slab, man. Check this out. You know,
Yeah, now
and it
that's
just
gonna, all that testing required for concentrates is generally at a higher level than for flour. You also have residual solvent testing, and generally everything has to be run in duplicate to verify for pesticides and solvents for concentrates.
uh so you got to run the
Um,
half of the sample once and then run another half of it separately.
yes, yeah, we do. Also the aspect of homogeneity in a product there too. Sometimes people make products that is 80% THC in one place and 60% in another because of it just not
Uh,
being mixed up well,
yeah,
and that can also cause testing
like
problems.
the actual cupcake was 60 and then the frosting was like 35 or something because they were mixed
Well,
separately and didn't have
that's a whole nother part of the testing for edibles and stuff. There's a lot of science that goes into the preparing of the sample for the instruments that do the testing. When you test something like a sugary product, a food, it can cause problems with the instruments. So you always have to spend more time. And unfortunately, it's a problem that we struggle with too in other labs. And I know that just as a comment on the industry, until labs kind of increase their sophistication, a lot of the edible and topical producers sometimes suffer a little bit because laboratories have trouble actually measuring what's in their products accurately.
yeah, man, that I like the chromatography test. I've read a bunch of articles that say that's not as accurate as the liquid test.
Liquid chromatography. Yeah, we
Yeah.
use the HPLCs, the high pressure liquid chromatography. They used to use gas chromatography for potency, but
Mm-hmm.
yeah, there were some aspects to the accuracy of the testing. With HPLC, you can more accurately measure the acidic cannabinoids, which was more difficult to do in gas chromatography. But yeah,
The
that's just
THC.
one thing too. Is every lab generally has somewhat slightly of a standard operating procedure as well, and that's just a comment on the industry as well. That if there's not a consensus methodology in a state, generally you have different labs giving out different numbers relative to each other, and it creates kind of an unfortunate scenario where clients get to go shop around for numbers that are higher from place to place, and that's not where we want to be.
Yeah. Yeah, objectivity is the goal for me because like I used to rock with MRX all the time, like as a medical grower,
uh-huh.
and no matter what store I was working at, and people are like, oh, I heard you can pay. I'm like, dude, I've got tests back from them that were 14%, and I've got tests back that were 26%, you know, and it's to me, it seemed pretty objective, but I don't know. I can't vouch for what anybody
Unfortunately,
else experienced.
earlier on in the days of Oregon's laboratory testing, I believe there was more of there's an incentive to survive just as a company as well, and people's ethics, especially in cannabis, sometimes are questionable just because there's not as much regulation and oversight as there needs to be.
Yeah.
But like I said, it might not be malicious too. Sometimes just one lab does their extraction and process method one way, another lab does it different, and sometimes that can create a difference between one lab measuring cannabis at 18% and another one measuring it at 25% per se. And it could be the same cannabis, and it might not be their fault. They might just there's a lot of things on our end as a lab too that can cause variation in the results that we give our clients.
Word. So I guess my next cookie cutter question is, what are some of your concerns for the industry from your point of view? I remember talking to you on the phone. You had something to say about the solvents and the extracts.
Yeah. So solvents we see a lot of solvents and extracts across the industry, and it's really up to the state to decide. Yeah, and to be honest, it's difficult to kind of get everything out. I'll concede that at some point, you end up with a very, very small amount that's very difficult, if even possible, to get all the way out. But
yeah.
We see that in
there was a lot of times where I could taste it, you know what I mean? And the guy'd be like, "No, I did a 72-hour purge," and I'm like, "Bro, it tastes like it tastes like butane, bro, like barbecue fluid." So not all of it came out,
ethanol,
dude.
The state doesn't regulate some of the chemicals like ethanol, or so there can be a lot of that sometimes in people's products, and even if there's a lot of it, it's not our mandate to really regulate that, so we just let it go. But I think the biggest problem, if I had to put one facing the industry, is right now with the CBD hemp boom that's taking place.
Yeah, talk about it, Paul. Talk about
it. It's so popularized, and there's so much money to be made in fake products that's the biggest thing that people are going to be fighting against is that product that you buy. Can you trust the label claim? Because it's not regulated. So generally, if you buy an edible that says 100 milligrams, it doesn't matter if it has 10 milligrams in it. It can still be sold with the label that says 100 milligrams because there's no enforcing body to oversee that. And it doesn't help anybody. Pesticides are getting through into products, and it's kind of the Wild West again. Hopefully the regulation puts it back into its place. But I feel like the people that'll, it's going to deter people from wanting to depend on cannabis in the future necessarily if they can't believe what they're buying. And CBD, I feel, is like the biggest risk for people, especially in Arizona too, where, you guys are further away from a lot of the hemp grows and stuff. So
yeah, man,
how do you guys reliably source good hemp products and stuff? And
yeah, man,
going to
that's
oversee outsourcing or sourcing for stuff too is, we're requiring more heavy metal testing. That's another type of testing that's kind of popping into the radar.
That's cool.
And that's to look for, especially in hemp, to look for like lead and arsenic and mercury, cadmium. So those are just another way that, it's something that we haven't looked at too much as an industry, so we can't really comment on how safe we're being with people.
No doubt.
But we're starting to do that more and more now.
So what sort of number would you put on the amount of solvents that are in extracts that make it to the shelf? Like, can you ballpark a figure for us or something?
It's going to depend on the process of extraction. Obviously, butane is one of the most popular. I would say that, of butane products, I think for Oregon, the measured amount is 5,000 parts per billion. of butane are allowed in a product. And so, without commenting on whether that's too high or too low, just for people, we'll see anywhere from 100 to 1,000 or 2,000, probably about 30% of the time. That's
Damn.
just real ballparkish, but so within below 20 or 30% of the allotted limit, but that's pretty common. I would
Word.
say.
Yeah, well, like that. I mean, as a medical grower too, I think it was 10,000 colony forming units for mold is what the test was. So it's like
Yeah,
you could still have mold on your weed when you submit, as long as it wasn't a lot,
yeah,
and you could still pass it, and it could meld. It could mold on the shelf later. I remember one of my homies
yeah.
made some bubble hash, and when he gave it to me, I was like, "Dope!" And then a couple months later, I pulled it out, and it was moldy. I was like, "Oh man."
Yeah, the store, and sometimes too, somebody will take weed that was dried right, and it'll get wet in storage or on its way to storage, and that can to cause it too. Some people don't realize if you take like weed from a hot environment to a cold environment, things like that too can cause water to condense out, and anytime you get enough water somewhere, it's just going to happen. There's nothing you can do about it.
No doubt. Okay, Paul. So we have a question from one of our YouTube viewers.
Yeah.
So if the business was to fail their lab test, like, do they have a chance to get it together before the next test, or do they have, like, can they give you another sample, and then are they allowed so many fails before they get shut down, or like how does that process work out? Do you guys get very many fails?
The people that have made it this far in the industry, they've gotten a lot better at reducing the number of fails that they receive. I would say so.
No
It depends
doubt.
on the type of test. Let me just say that first. They do allow some tests to be redone. Certain solvents can be remediated. Others cannot be. Pesticides. I think piperonal butoxide is the most common pesticide we see on stuff. And if you fail for
What is that?
that, the state will
Avid?
actually give you the ability to remediate it. Avid is one that we see infrequently, thankfully, but that's one of the ones that has a systemic pesticide, I believe. And those ones, if you fail for that, you cannot remediate. So,
Yeah.
so some tests you're done if you fail. Other tests you can kind of correct. Concentrates, they can go back, and if they have too much butane, they can again remediate, but they can take it back and put it through another
Turn
purge
it to
cycle and
distillate or
resubmit a
something.
sample. Yeah,
Word.
so you can redo those
Damn.
kind of tests. But for for an ingestible maker, if you're trying to sell a 50 milligram cookie and it's only 40 milligrams, you get like one retest, and then unfortunately that batch is no good anymore.
Okay, I think that's Anthony Smith calling in.
Oh,
I don't think that's on my app. It must be somewhere over there. Um, it's Mitchell. Okay, sorry, fellas. Can you guys turn the ringer off somehow? Okay, so let's move on to our next question, I guess.
yeah.
Um, what are some of your current goals and ambitions in the industry?
um, I think with the change Canada's made recently to open up cannabis, across the country, America's really behind the eight ball now with just seeing some of the size of companies coming out of Canada. I think I'd like to see, the United States change their laws so that we can start, competing on equal grounds with some of the other countries that are getting into the game. I think that's kind of a goal, but also just I don't want the medical side to be forgotten in this whole process towards rec, because I remember that's how it started. That was what opened up the door for everybody, and I think that we got to keep, acknowledging that or recognizing that and not forget about it, because those are the people that allowed us to get to where we are today.
Word. Okay, man, good answer. Are there any other ideas or concepts that you want to promote in the future?
Um, now that I've worked in the laboratory side of things, I encourage farms to really try to start conversations with your labs to better understand the testing side of things, because I think that safety aspect to the cannabis industry is so important for the longevity of it. Um, that would kind of just be my overall message for things. Just don't don't. I remember hating testing, being on the processing and production side of things because it's so inaccessible, but um, I do think it's very necessary now that I've seen all the craziness that can go on behind the scenes without it.
Yeah, dude, I agree. And that's, I mean, for real, being where I'm at in AZ, I'm like, man, I just assume everything's dirty and sprayed with all kinds of poison. But
Yeah, be
uh,
skeptical,
Probably a safe
unfortunately.
assumption.
yeah, so it makes me miss Oregon at times, but I get to go back and visit a few times a year. So
Yeah, please stop by and see us if you're in the area.
yeah, man, I'll hit you guys up for sure. Do you want to plug your social media or anything before we wrap up the interview?
No, just thanks for having us on again, repping Chem History and my little company, Swift Solutions. I really appreciate you having me on and asking me all the questions and stuff. And I hope you guys have a good rest of your podcast.
Well, dude, we appreciate you
Absolutely,
taking the
man.
time because, dude, I've never worked in a lab at all. And I was like, I feel like we should cover this on the podcast, but you really shined a lot of light on the way stuff works. And it's cool, dude. Like, thank you for taking the time and answering our questions because hopefully some production guys are gonna listen and be like, oh, okay, cool, man, let's holler at those guys. I didn't know they did that, you know. Hopefully it's promotion for both sides, I hope, you know. So
Yeah, no,
real
thank you for
positive.
taking an interest in it.
And then if we have anything else lab related in the future, we will definitely hit you up and try to do a follow-up interview, man. Maybe you'll ball out on your consulting company in the next year, and we'll have a bunch of cool questions to ask you about that.
No, I'd love to. I'd really like to be on anytime. A, to inform, most importantly, but B, to kind of, there's a lot of exciting things happening in the industry that don't get the spotlight necessarily, but it'd be fun to talk about. But
No doubt,
thank you
no
very much
doubt.
again for your time.
Yeah, thank you, Paul Swift.
Thanks,
We
man.
appreciate you coming on. Hope you have a good rest of your night, man.
Yeah, thank you, Paul.
You too. Have
Appreciate
a
it.
good one.
All right,
Thank you,
later.
guys. Bye-bye.
All right. What did you think, Will?
Yeah, that was awesome. A lot of great information.
Yeah, dude, because it is like all I know is submitting the sample, and
Yeah, I don't know much, so that
that's
was really great to hear him talk about that. I was just listening, basically, because I
y-
mean, I know on the my side, or at least the dispensary side, like what we need to include in the labels of
yeah.
what we sell, but beyond that, I don't really know any of the science behind it, or anything other than that. So
Me neither. Like, one story is when I was working up in Seattle for my uncle. He had a booth at the Northwest Cannabis Market. Uh, 360 Analytical. They were down in Olympia. They were a lab in Washington.
yep,
They
I
would
remember
come
them.
through. They would come through. Okay, hey Anthony Smith, I'm gonna finish my story and then we're gonna start your interview. Okay. Uh, it- yeah, it sounds pretty good, dude. Sounds pretty good. Okay, and so 360 Analytical would come through, and there's like 40 vendors in there, and they would slide through and be like, "Hey, you guys want to test?" And I'd be like, I don't have the bucks, you know what I mean?" And they're like, "Oh, we'll do it for free." I'm like, "Why are you guys doing them for free?" And I guess they were using the gas chromatography machine,
Hmm.
and they had it calibrated for I guess 30 samples. And so it's like if you didn't put 30 in there, it wouldn't work properly. And so they would just try to fill it up with whatever, and they would bring you the
So
card and then the sheet printed out with the results. So I was like, man, shoot, here, try this OG Kush. So
yeah, 360 Analytical used to test for us for the Leaf, like when we had products that we would review. And they used to do it for free. We just had to, shouted them out, gave them a little credit on the bottom of the page. So,
tight.
yeah, they're cool.
Okay, so ladies and gentlemen, we have a second guest here on Concerned Dads podcast this evening. We have Anthony Smith from, is it EVIO Labs? Is it EVIO or EVIO? EVIO? EVIO Labs. Awesome. So how are you doing tonight, sir? All right. Dope, man. We appreciate you taking time out. I know you're on a 3-day weekend somewhere cool, so it's like, man, thanks for chilling out and talking to us for a second. Yeah. So, I guess my first cookie cutter question, can you please state your name and the company you work for and the state that you're in? Awesome, dude. So you guys have a lab down there in Ashland too, or what?
It's like the bigger city that's, like the first big city on I-5 as you come into Oregon as you're heading north. And then we
Okay.
also have a lab in Portland, Oregon. That's our Oregon ops.
Yeah.
Also, California, Florida, Colorado, Massachusetts, and Alberta, Canada.
Dang, dude, that's awesome, man. Big things,
Yeah, it's a
big
fun project.
things. Yeah. So, like, would you say that it's easier to do your job in Canada than it is in this country for your company at
Uh,
least?
I'm not sure if it's easier. I mean, the pesticide list in particular is pretty technical. In Canada, it would be more as if it's as if in the United States, like the way FDA requires certain drugs and things to be tested, it would be more like that in Canada. They have a pretty extensive pesticide list. They use the same solvents, residual solvent, and microbiology testing that you would see, in like food and pharma. So it's pretty stringent. I wouldn't say it's easy. That's for sure.
Okay, good answer, man. So how
it's
did
easy
you
that
find
you can mail samples around.
Yeah, that's all I know about it, bro. Like that's all,
Mail order.
I've never worked at a lab before, so I'm really glad that both of you guys could come on and answer some questions, because that's all I know is sending in the sample either as a grower or a dispensary guy. So
Okay.
I appreciate you, man. How did you find yourself? How did you find yourself in the cannabis industry, like in this part? Like, did you go to school for something else, or did you have this in mind when you were getting your education?
I had it in mind, I guess, as a young chemist. Honestly, we used to sneak into, you guys were talking about a GC earlier, we used to inject cannabis samples into a GC in our organic lab in undergraduate chemistry. And of course, we didn't have access to any standards back then, but we could deduce because most weed would have this one high peak, so we could deduce that was THC, and some weed had 3 peaks, and like if it had a little bit bigger second peak, we figured out that was probably CBD, and then this third peak we assumed was CBN. But I didn't
Dude,
not go to
that's
school for that.
awesome, man. That's awesome.
That's back in the early 90s.
Very cool, dude. Very cool.
But I went to school at Oregon State University for my graduate work, and worked at the Linus Pauling Institute. And I've always been fascinated with nutritional biochemistry and like human physiology and performance. And so in graduate school, I worked a lot on nutritional supplements and vitamins, and sort of working on biochemistry of different things, vitamin C and lipoic acid and some other like food chemistry. And I was super fascinated by all that technology, and I worked for a number of years after school, formulating and testing, and also doing research on nutraceuticals and commercial dietary supplements, like for sports and athletes and things like that, and even like pharmaceutical grade preparations of herbal medicines. So I didn't intend to go into cannabis, but along about the mid-2000s, I started to realize or imagine that there was going to be some commercialization, even if it was on the medical side.
Yeah.
And guys were, again, at that time starting to ask me to, do potency testing and stuff.
Yeah.
So
man, he's a chemist. He knows what he's doing.
I had a GC in my garage after about 2012, I think, and that was super interesting. And then I was working at a company designing and building medical diagnostic devices, so things that these little instruments to test for like parasites and bacteria and things like that. And it wasn't that exciting for me, and I just saw commercial cannabis like emerging. So I quit my other job in late 2013, and I opened a lab in Southern Oregon, and back then it was called Kenavir Research. In 2014.
Oh, I remember that, dude.
Yeah, I remember that too.
Yeah, that was yours?
Yeah.
Awesome,
Yeah, I started
dude.
that.
That's cool. We had the guy from Kenavir. That's dope. Well, because we had a lot of growers in Southern Oregon that were on the shelf at Natural Wonders when we were just a medical dispensary.
Yeah.
So we would see your guys' labs, and they seemed a lot more thorough than everyone else's, so we were impressed.
Yeah, I had come out of doing, like ISO accredited work, for lab stuff and also for manufacturing, and it just kind of made sense to me. I thought, well, once cannabis farmers get commercial, it's going to be like a high-end commodity, and they're going to need all this sort of safety and potency and purity information. And for the most part, I would say, yeah, the industry, does and has appreciated it, but a little bit not at times. But
I know the test is more expensive. Yeah, it's more expensive now that it went rec, and the batch size is a lot larger, and so is the sample size. So I don't know. I feel like small mom and pop guys just feel phased out, and that is what's happening. But it's like, man, that's the business. At least you can still grow your 4 at home, not have to do any paperwork. Absolutely. I think that's still a good idea,
Yep, it's true. I don't think California has that rule, but Oregon definitely allows, I think any given household or individual can have 4 plants. And that's the mom and pop of today, I suppose.
Yeah, man, I agree. Everything else is going super huge. I guess that kind of relates to my next cookie cutter question is, what was the transition like going from medical to recreational for like the ORLAP certification and all that?
for us, when we got started in early 2014, yes, at that time it was all medical, like a commercial medical, right? Because dispensaries opened about mid 2014, and
Yes,
we're able
sir.
to sell materials. And
Yep.
before that, there wasn't batch controls and that sort of stuff, which I was used to seeing more like in herbal commodities. You know, if you buy echinacea or golden seal, you know, in bulk from overseas or anything, obviously there's all this sort of batch traceability and stuff, and nobody had really much clue what that sort of stuff was. But other than that, it's just got like a lot more regulatory, like paperwork and software related things. It's really the only thing I think different that commercial or so-called rec is different from the lab's perspective. You know, like from the growers and producers and distributors and even retailers, it changed a lot. I don't underestimate that. But from the lab's perspective, the testing stuff, at least the way we started, I thought right away that people would want or expect a lab to be ISO accredited 17025, and so when we opened, we were not accredited for that, but we were striving to be and organized and sort of on that level for data realization. But I didn't, you know, I hadn't anticipated that it would be, you know, they would go with ORLAP, which is something very similar to ISO. But
So you think
in
there
the
was
lab,
the ORLAP's not as thorough or whatever as those other accreditations you were talking about?
I would say in some senses it's a little more thorough, honestly. Like the core, like the core code or whatnot of ISO and TNI, which is what ORLAP follows. That's the name of the standard. It's fundamentally the same, but you know, ORLAP uses this TNI, and it's more evolved out of environmental testing. So a bunch of it is sort of non-congruent with what we do on a day-to-day basis in the lab. So you know, it's been like a big learning curve for ORLAP to even kind of understand not just the cannabis stuff, but just some of the laboratory things that we do, because it's just not normal compared to Enviro labs, which really work with like usually just water and soil.
Yeah, dude, it's really good to hear this perspective on it. One of our IT guys has a question. He says, "What is ISO 02025? What like that's an accreditation besides ORLAP that a lab can receive in order to do business or something?"
Right. So ORLAP is Oregon Environmental Laboratory Accreditation Program, right? So it's an office of the state that's managed by OHA, and they will accredit labs to a lab standard. And the standard that they use is called TNI, or I forget what it stands for. The NELAC Institute, I think. And NELAC is National Environmental Laboratory Accreditation Council or something like that. So TNI is the standard or a book of like how you organize your lab and how you realize data and qualify data and benchmark not only your accuracy and precision, but also measure your uncertainty and all sorts of specifications, you know, about traceability and things like that. ISO
cool,
17025 is an international standard that is for analytical laboratories, and where TNI is focused on environmental labs, 17025 ISO is general analytical lab international standard. So you can use the ORLAP agency to get accredited to that TNI, but there are a number of, you know, third-party independent accreditation institutes that will accredit a lab for ISO. So ISO 17025 is pretty much everywhere else but Oregon. So our California, Florida, Oregon, and Massachusetts lab are all ISO 17025 accredited, not ORLAB TNI stuff.
Wow. I did not know that, dude. That's very good information, man.
They're mostly the same, these standards. There's some nomenclature, but like the fundamentals in the they're about the same. Yeah.
Dang. Okay. Yeah. The same guy. Can you please say which states you're in as far as labs again? Can you say that one more time down the list?
Sure. On the West Coast, we are in Portland and Medford in Oregon.
Portland and Medford.
In Berkeley, California.
Berkeley, tight, dude.
Yep, and I think we had a press release, so I can say this, but we're opening a lab in Costa Mesa, Orange County.
Dope.
And so that'll be a while before it's open for service, but you know that's our newest project. Denver, Colorado, and 2 sites in Florida, Davie, which is near Fort Lauderdale, and Gainesville. Those both have EVIO labs. And
in Florida?
Yes. And then Massachusetts.
Damn.
And
that's tight.
In Canada, Edmonton, Alberta.
Dope, dude. Very cool, man. I didn't know you guys were that large. Like that's dope. You gotta toot your company's horn a little bit right there, Anthony. That's awesome.
It's been an exciting project. I definitely would say that.
So are you guys gonna be publicly traded in the future or something like that? Because that sounds like a company that's set up to win. What's the name of the stock on that?
It's EVIO. So we are on the OTC pink sheets. Our stock is EVIO. Yep.
Tight, dude. I'm gonna tell my grandpa too. I'm gonna be like, hey, listen to this podcast.
That's awesome.
Grab a few of those right there, Grandpa. He's about that life.
All right, that's good to hear.
Yeah. Okay. So, how many pesticides do Oregon labs check for compliance on a rec test?
That's a good pop quiz. I think there are 59 like reportable compounds, but there are probably 61 or 62 that we test for on the mass spec because a couple of them get added together.
Oh, okay, cool. Like it's the same compound in 2 different products or something like that.
Yeah, exactly. And then in particular, like pyrethrin is a quote as a natural product, and it's actually a composition of I think 3 different molecule types in there. Yeah.
Yeah, I remember guys failing for that after labs went rec, and that was their complaint. Is like, man, it's made from a flower extract. It's not toxic, and I'm like, man, it fails. It fails. I don't. That's not my job, dude. I just, I can't put it on.
Yeah, totally. Other stuff is like that too. I mean, there are other pesticides on pesticide lists that are sourced from natural sources. Doesn't mean it's good to eat just because it's natural.
Yeah, no doubt. I agree, man. So, what other tests besides potency and pesticides are required for compliance on a rec test and a medical test?
Sure. In Oregon, they also require moisture content, which is just the percent weight of the sample, which is water. That's required on flour, but not any other products. Residual solvent analysis is required on most concentrates, like unless they're like pressed products or like keef or products like that aren't extracted with solvents.
Yeah. You guys do you guys do the water? Is the water test on rosin or anything like that doesn't use solvent? Like, do you guys still do the moisture test on those?
No, because those are usually, there's no requirement by the state to get those done, moisture content or water activity.
Ah,
Those are tough to test. Like you can tell if there's water in those, right? They're like foamy or off-colored usually.
yeah, man. You can see some white on a dark piece of hash. I'm like, what is that? It looks like mold. Oh
Yep.
no, it's cool, man. It's
Yeah.
cool. It doesn't look cool, bro. Man,
It's
those
water.
ones, man. Yeah.
Yeah.
So okay. So my next cookie cutter question: do you guys still
Mhm.
receive any medical samples to test from medical growers? Do you guys receive many of those anymore?
Yes, absolutely. There still is a slice of commercial cannabis in Oregon, and when I say commercial, I say like you can buy it and people can sell it. That's done through the medical program. Absolutely. Most of the ones of any size are being required to use the metric seed to sale tracking system, just like the OLCC rec
Yeah.
guys are.
Yep.
So yes, it still is there. And then there's still a fair bit of medical stuff that's, just like the olden days, like it's free or exchanged between growers and patients. And that isn't technically required to be tested, but we do see a lot of like walk-in testing, or sometimes what we call informational use testing, where rather than all the commercial route and the requirement for sampling and paperwork and reporting, people just bring their own materials in and just request the test that they want.
That's cool. So you guys still do that? You don't, like a recreational license isn't required. You can still bring in your medical card and be like, hey, I grew this, or I
Absolutely,
made
yes.
this hash. Can you guys run a test on this? How much does it cost? And you guys will still do business with that person.
Absolutely.
That's awesome,
Sure.
man. That's very
Yep.
cool.
Yeah.
Okay, so my next cookie cutter question, Anthony, is what are some of your concerns for the industry from your point of view?
That's a good question. Some concerns.
Yeah, it's Concern Dabs podcast. We try
Yeah.
to talk about it's, and not necessarily to be worrisome. It's just like, hey, like,
Mhm.
yeah, this is cool, but we should work on this, because this isn't
Yeah.
so cool.
Well, one thing, you can see it in this historical record as states go recreational and require not just lab testing, but like all of the regulatory stuff that's involved with it, like the tax tracking and the seed to sale and the analytical testing. When that happens, like there's this commercial whiplash that happens, right? The first time the gates are open, all of these investors have invested and put farms, and there's just like a massive amount of production. And then after about a year, and this happened in Washington, it happens in Oregon, it's starting to happen in California, you just get all this overproduction and oversupply of materials, and then, the farmers take it the worst. The price of grade A cannabis plummets.
Yeah,
That's something to be
dude.
concerned about, right? Because we need to make it a viable commercial industry, and it's tough when you see that super volatility in price. Like
For
it
real,
looked like
dude.
in
That's why I left
2017 in
Oregon,
Oregon,
bro.
it
It's
just
like if I could have
rock
stayed there
bottom.
and exported, it would have been awesome, but I couldn't. Like, for real, 2017, I was like, this is it. Like, I'm done. Like, I can't do this anymore. Like, it's fucking everywhere out here, and I just can't
Yeah,
get the number that I want. You know what I mean? So it was a
yeah,
bummer, dude.
absolutely.
And I feel like
And
a
part
lot
of
of
that
those,
is the restriction of it still being federally illegal, and so you can't export it. Like
yeah,
that would smooth out a lot of the economic instability when these industries
I agree.
turn on.
I agree.
Because I feel
Like,
like if Ohio or Illinois, if they want to legalize cannabis, those are not efficient or good places to grow. So
I
those kind of
agree.
states, if they could say, well, we're going to legalize like the commercial sale of it, but not the commercial growing of it, and then they could just import it from Oregon or California where it's already tested and it's a really good place to grow.
Yeah, man.
Oregon
I agree.
doesn't even have 5 million people, and it produced, a couple million pounds of marijuana in a very short
Of
time.
surplus. Yeah, 2 years, bro. Like that's every article says like 1.2 came down each year, like after it went rec, and only 350,000 pounds moved through the store. So in my head, I'm
Yeah.
like, there's like 1.5 million just sitting there, doing nothing, turning brown.
Yep.
Like if those guys
Yep.
could ship it to another state, they wouldn't be stressed out and not being able to pay their bills and kicking themselves in the balls for putting all their money into it. Because the guys who have millions
Yeah.
of dollars are not stressing it because they can suffer through this and not have it hurt them. But the mom and pops, like, man, it's sad, bro. Like all that surplus, like the price is plummeting, and those guys
Yeah.
you
I
can't
agree.
transfer it out of state on metric, man. It's on the computer, so just gonna
Right.
sit there.
You can do almost nothing with it, really.
Yeah.
And
Oregon
I mean,
should have capped licenses a
legalization
long
is,
time ago.
yep.
Yeah, they just started doing that this year, right, Anthony? Capping licenses.
They did. Most of 2018, they hadn't capped it, but they were going to like stop working on them, or so they said. But now they have capped it. Yeah, for sure.
Damn.
Because the OLCC is not even, muscled up even enough to like do the basic work. I mean, there was a pretty scathing report came out by the Oregon Secretary of State in January, February about the OLCC, and it seems like they've kind of done a crappy job from that report.
Damn, I'm gonna have to look that up. Maybe we can get that lady on the show, man.
Yeah, you should look that up.
Well, because we called OLCC to be on our regulation episode, and they didn't call us back. The liquor guy did, but the cannabis guy did not. And so I was like, man, he was like, well, I had this on.
Yeah.
I'm like, sorry, dude. I'm like, I looked up the faculty on the website. I'm like, you were the beer guy or the alcohol guy. I wanted to talk to the cannabis guy. He's like, oh, tell him you called. I was like, I left a voicemail with him too. He didn't hit me up, so maybe he is super busy. I don't know. I don't want to be a government apologist or anything. So I just figured nobody from government would want to come on the show and answer questions about how good or bad of a job that they're doing.
I'm not surprised.
Yeah, me neither.
That'd be a fun show, though. They've gotten beat
Yeah,
up pretty bad in the press. I know that.
yeah, I agree, man. Got to be tough to work in that building, especially if you're a boss. So my next cookie cutter question, what are some of your goals and ambitions in your current position at the company you're at?
Some of my goals and ambitions. Well, I really like chemistry and analytical testing.
Word.
But what I'm super passionate about is, there's all kinds of interesting biotechnology and manufacturing technology and even agricultural technology that's already for cannabis, like all sorts of interesting, cool applications. So I'm excited about as the industry matures, not only this mission of about public safety and quality control that the labs do, but also starting to add in biotechnology services. A couple of those things, stuff that we get asked about and even work on more and more is cell culture, which is kind of like a laboratory test tube automated way, if you will, for doing clones.
Oh
There's
yeah,
some other
I've read
stuff.
about that.
Yeah, the use of PCR to do genetic sequencing of strains, which helps in sort of farming and sort of the IP development aspect of breeding, but also in sort of the commercial output kind of realm. The use of we're also using PCR for like rapid sex identification. Also like microbiology suites of testing for like large greenhouses or manufacturing spaces where they can't afford to a loss of a couple clicks of efficiency. So we'll do biological swabs from all around the greenhouse and growing and media prep areas and help growers find
Where the problem points are.
Bacterial. Yeah, exactly. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, like, man, it came from this bucket, dude. I told you to clean that out and dry it, man. You just cleaned it and left it sitting like on its bottom, man. You're supposed to turn it upside down, and now we got mold.
Exactly.
Blame this guy.
Yep.
Fire this man. All right. So that's cool, dude. It's cool that you have ideas and like a place that you want to go besides where you're at. The next cookie cutter question is what sort of ideas and concepts would you like to promote for the future, besides the biotechnology stuff that you talked about?
The concepts like that I try to preach about, I guess, if you will, is like because cannabis industry in general is like this amazing and diverse culture all of its own. But because of prohibition, it's been kind of marginalized, or we have always felt like this other thing, right? And now it's commercial, and people sometimes people got to realize, like, in all aspects of it, like, the basic business rules apply. Quality assurance, safety, efficiency, and so there's a way to kind of keep ourselves unique, but the rise of like organized quality assurance in farming and in manufacturing, like, it leads to better and cleaner products, and it improves all aspects of people's experience, whether it's recreational or commercial or medical. And so this is kind of the one that I like to, like, I guess, chant about the most, is like, if you're gonna farm, or if you're gonna extract, or if you're gonna manufacture, treat it like an art, but also treat it like an engineered science, right? Keep logs and track things and understand, all of the materials that you input into it, because at some point, with art, you can spend millions of dollars to make a beautiful thing, and it's empirically beautiful. But in a commercial aspect, like, it can't cost you $1 million to make something that you're going to sell, for $1,001 million. Like, that's not a business, right? So all across the board, traceability and tracking and understanding, it makes better products and more efficient use of, like, all these resources.
Awesome, man. Awesome. Is there any questions that you want to ask, Will?
Yeah, this one's kind of, I guess I should ask this earlier, but how does sampling work with you guys? Do you guys like drive out to growers and pick up samples at the farm, or do you have them come to you? How does that work?
So in the Oregon context, and California is very, very similar. It's I won't say it's impossible, but it's very impractical because of the metric seed to sale transport rules for clients to bring their batches to the lab. I mean, it can be done. Like sometimes we do it like with small batches and things, but for the most part, yeah, we drive out. So we've got a small fleet of cars and field technicians who are, highly trained, and they have a lot of paperwork and traceability that they have to maintain. ORLAP does follow up and audit on all of that stuff regularly. So, yeah, generally with our laboratories, we've got field techs going out to farms, yeah, on request. Sometimes it's a regular schedule. And then the materials are all there in organized batches, maximum 15 pounds. There's a specific set of rules put out by ORLAP that require us to, based on the exact sample size, the number of increments to be collected and how much total mass. I think it's 0.05% of the batch size required to be collected.
Nice.
Yeah, and then it's all brought back to the lab, like with transfer manifests and metric tags and whatnot.
Nice.
Very cool, man. Very cool.
That's another weird thing, like for labs, like we've been in our laboratories with our white coats, with all these, beeping machines and tubes and electronics. Like we really focused on that for our whole lives. And then just a rule rolls over, and now we have to add this thing to our business, which is like a little mini FedEx, right? Like we have to hire technicians and buy cars and have them drive around and figure out mileage and costing on the business side. Yeah, it's pretty wild.
Word.
It's not something that they taught us, like in chemistry, is how to run a
that's like a logistics
business.
Major. Yeah, like
Right.
I deliver packages for Amazon, and I'm a 1099 employee, so I have an app that tracks my mileage so I can write it off when I do my taxes and all that too. So I could imagine like you guys, we're trained to do something totally different. So that's something new to learn, you know what I mean? And hire people too, because hiring people that are solid too is difficult, dude. And it's with paperwork and stuff too. A lot of people are just not as thorough.
Yeah, you have to hire super solid people that do that, because not only are they driving the company car, but they're going out to, actually be face to face with all of our key clients. Some of these places are way out in the middle of nowhere, these ranches. Some of them are big commercial ops, so yeah, it definitely requires a professional person.
No doubt. So is there any social media or anything you want to plug before we conclude this interview? Do you have anything for yourself going on IG, or are you that active? I don't know. Like,
I am, but only for my skiing and mountain bike exploits.
Awesome, dude. That's cool. What's do you want to plug that on here, man? I'm sure you can gain a few more followers. That guy's a cannabis lab testing guy. Cool. And he rides mountain bikes.
Let's see. I think I'm A. Smith Outriding. A. Smith Outriding. Yep.
A. Smith.
Because that's what I'm usually doing if I'm not working in the lab.
Awesome, dude. Awesome. Well, we really appreciate you taking the time out on your vacation to talk to us, dude. We know it's a three-day weekend, and you're probably doing something awesome with your family or something. So,
yeah, Jonathan, I appreciate you getting in touch with me, and it's been exciting because I'm just kind of sitting in the backyard talking on the phone, but I'm going to go listen to this podcast, and I'm super excited to hear how it goes. So I appreciate you reaching out, and maybe let's collaborate, see if there's some cool stuff we could work on.
Yeah, man, I'm down. I'll hit you up before the next time I come to Oregon, and then I'll text you the Spotify link once we got it, and then the YouTube should be up
Okay.
shortly after we're done. So you should be able
Okay.
to look at that. But if not, I'll text you both by Monday or Tuesday, and then we'd love to have you back sometime in the future and do a follow-up interview also.
Absolutely.
Sure thing. I love Arizona too. I'll be out there mountain biking this fall probably, so maybe we'll see you out there.
Okay, cool, man. Cool. Yeah, hit me up, dude. You got my number, so let me know.
Thanks, Jonathan. Thanks,
Yeah,
team.
man. Have a good rest of your night,
Yeah.
Anthony Smith.
Thanks,
Have a
man.
good night. Talk to you later.
Good night, gents.
Yep, later. All right, Will. What'd you think about him, Will?
That was awesome.
Yeah,
More
dude.
great
He was,
info.
yeah, super sharp, man. Like, cause yeah, like I said before, I know nothing about this job, man, and it's cool to
Yep.
hear them talk about the processes and everything because that is, man, efficiency is a real thing. If it takes forever to do something, then it costs more on the price sheet. You know what I mean? So, and
Definitely.
those guys went to med school, so I'm sure their salary is probably pretty high. You know,
Yep.
so if they're on the clock, it's like, man, it's a lot more expensive.
Absolutely.
But I guess that's pretty much it, folks. That was our 6th episode. I'm gonna go ahead and do our outro dance. This has been the 6th episode of the Concerned Dabs podcast. I am your host, Katie M. Kane. With me was my co-host, Will Terps. I got to give a shout out to my production crew. That's Mitchell Wilson and Jesse Curry. This has been a Main Node and Joseph Street Enterprise production.